Dr. Elina Reed preferred the company of the dead, not their bodies, but their voices, the faint, ghostly whispers left behind in stone, clay, and papyrus. In her quiet university office, surrounded by grammars of forgotten languages, she found a sense of order and peace that the modern world could not offer. She could spend a decade deciphering a single sentence of Proto-Elamite, and to her, that was a life well spent. So when two men in dark, impeccably tailored suits appeared at her door well after midnight, she knew they were not from the faculty. They moved with a quiet, purposeful gravity, their faces unreadable. The older of the two presented an ID from the Department of Defense and spoke in a low, even tone. "Dr. Reed," he said, without preamble, "your country requires your expertise, a matter of utmost national security." He offered no further explanation. He simply told her to pack a bag with enough clothes for an indefinite stay. He assured her that her university duties would be taken care of. There was no room for questions, no possibility of refusal. It was an invitation delivered with the force of a command. 2 hours later, she was sitting in the unnerving comfort of a small, unmarked executive jet ascending into the dark, star-filled sky. The windows were blacked out. The men who accompanied her were polite but silent, their presence a constant, quiet pressure. Elina tried to quell the racing of her mind. What dead language could possibly constitute a matter of national security? A newly discovered Linear A tablet? A lost Egyptian dialect? It made no sense. After hours of silent flight, the jet began its descent. When the door finally opened, she was met not by city lights, but by the cool, dry air of the desert night and a profound, overwhelming silence. She was led to a black SUV that drove for another hour through a landscape of immense, empty darkness. Then she saw them. Rising from the desert floor like a congregation of giant skeletal sentinels were the radio dishes of the very large array. They stood in a perfect silent line, their massive white faces tilted towards the heavens as if listening for a secret. The scale of the place was breathtaking, humbling. It was a temple to the act of listening. She was escorted into the main control room, down a series of sterile white corridors, to a central operations room humming with the quiet energy of powerful computers. A tired-looking man with graying temples and intense eyes turned to greet her. He introduced himself as Dr. Marcus Thorne, the project director. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He simply gestured towards a large screen displaying a complex, fluctuating waveform, unlike anything she had ever seen. From a speaker, a soft, organic sound filled the room, a series of clicks, whispers, and melodic sighs that sounded more like whale song than a radio signal. "It's been broadcasting continuously for 72 hours, Dr. Thorne said, his voice low and heavy with exhaustion. "It isn't math, and it isn't random noise. We think it's a language, Dr. Reed, and we need you to understand it." Elina spent the next 48 hours in a state of pure, unadulterated focus. The control room became her entire world. She slept on a cot in a small adjacent office, ate tasteless meals from trays, and lived for the sound emanating from the speakers. The team of astrophysicists and engineers gave her space, watching her with a mixture of hope and skepticism. She began by breaking the signal down into its fundamental components, just as she would with any unknown language, but every method she applied failed. There was no syntax she could recognize, no phonemes, no repeating morphemes that could be labeled and categorized. Standard linguistic analysis was useless. It was like trying to diagram the grammar of a waterfall. The signal was alive. That was the only way she could describe it. It had a rhythm, but it was the rhythm of a heartbeat, not a metronome. It had patterns, but they were the patterns of a branching tree, not of a logical equation. It was layered with immense complexity. She could isolate dozens of simultaneous threads of information, all weaving together into a cohesive, incomprehensible whole. "It doesn't talk, it is," she murmured to Dr. Thorne during one late-night session, pointing at the flowing waveform on the screen. A machine would send data in discrete packets, binary, prime numbers, something universal. This feels like we've tapped into a creature's central nervous system. We're not listening to a message, we're listening to it think. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. She wasn't just a translator anymore. She was a biologist of language, an explorer charting the coastline of an alien consciousness. The team provided her with every tool she could imagine: quantum computers to analyze the fractal patterns, neurolinguistic software to map the signal against known brainwave activities. Nothing worked. The pressure in the room was immense, a silent weight composed of government expectation and the profound loneliness of their task. Elina felt herself sinking into the sound, letting its strange organic flow wash over her. She stopped trying to impose human structure on it. She simply listened, letting her mind go quiet, hoping that somewhere in the deep, melodic current of the signal, a flicker of understandable meaning would eventually surface. On the third night, exhaustion finally claimed her. Elina fell onto the cot in her small office and was asleep within seconds. But her mind did not find the empty, dreamless rest she craved. Instead, it plunged into a world of impossible vividness. She found herself floating in a vast, dark space, but it wasn't frightening. It was calm, like the bottom of a silent ocean. There was no sense of pressure, no need to breathe. Around her grew colossal, crystalline structures that resembled trees, their geometric branches pulsing with a soft, internal light. The water was thick, like cool honey, and it carried faint, melodic vibrations that resonated deep inside her. There was a presence with her in this place. She couldn't see it, but she could feel it. A vast, ancient, and deeply curious consciousness. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was simply other. It moved around her, a slow, gentle current in the silent deep, observing her with an intensity that was palpable. She felt no fear, only a profound sense of awe. It was like being a single cell under the lens of a microscope, suddenly aware of the biologist looking down. She awoke with a gasp, the sterile white ceiling of her office a jarring contrast to the deep, pulsing blue of the dream. The melody from the dream still echoed faintly in her ears. She sat up, her heart pounding. It had felt more real than reality itself. She tried to dismiss it as a stress-induced hallucination, a product of sleep deprivation and constant exposure to the strange signal. Her mind was simply trying to make patterns out of chaos, projecting her work into her subconscious. It was a logical, rational explanation, and she clung to it. She got up and walked back into the main control room. The signal was still playing from the speakers, its organic clicks and sighs filling the quiet space. But as she listened, she heard it, a faint, underlying melody weaving through the complex layers of sound. It was the same melody she had heard in her dream. Her blood ran cold. The dream hadn't been a product of the signal. The dream was the signal. The next morning, Dr. Thorne convened a team meeting. The mood was tense. 3 days of work had yielded no results, and the pressure from their unseen superiors in Washington was mounting. They went around the table, each specialist giving a brief, discouraged report. When it was Elina's turn, she hesitated. Sharing the dream felt unprofessional, unscientific. But the memory of it, the sheer reality of the experience, compelled her to speak. This is going to sound strange, but I think we need to consider the neurological effects of the signal. Last night, I had an incredibly vivid dream. I was underwater, surrounded by glowing crystalline trees. There was a presence there, watching me. She expected skeptical looks, perhaps even pity. Instead, a young astrophysicist, on the other side of the table, a man named Ben Carter, looked up from his notepad, his face pale. My dream, it wasn't underwater.
It was a forest of singing glass. But the trees, they pulsed with light, and I felt it too, the feeling of being observed. A heavy silence fell over the room. One by one, two other members of the small team described their own strange dreams. The details were different: a cavern of echoing whispers, a sky filled with geometric constellations. But the core elements were the same: a non-Euclidean, crystalline environment, and the palpable feeling of a vast, silent consciousness. It's not trying to talk to us, it's trying to talk with us. It's establishing a common ground, a shared mental space, a dreamscape, because it doesn't have the physical means for language as we know it. It doesn't have a mouth or hands. It only has its own consciousness. Dr. Thorne stared at her, his usual skepticism replaced by a look of deep concern. The mission had just changed. They were no longer just translators. They were test subjects in the most profound psychological experiment in human history. And they had no idea what the long-term effects of this mental contact would be.
The discovery changed everything. Elina abandoned traditional linguistics entirely. Her new tools were not grammar books, but dream journals. She instructed every member of the team to write down or sketch everything they could remember from their dreams the moment they woke up. Her desk became a chaotic collage of surrealism and science. On one side, she had printouts of the signal's waveform, analyzed second by second. On the other, she had pages filled with hand-drawn sketches of impossible landscapes and transcriptions of feelings and abstract sensations. A sense of deep time, like stone eroding. A feeling of belonging to a large, silent swarm. The color of loneliness. She began a new, painstaking process. She cross-referenced the dream reports with the signal's data logs. She looked for correlations, for any pattern, no matter how tenuous. After days of frustrating work, she found one. A specific, high-frequency burst in the signal, a soft, sighing sound, consistently appeared within an hour of team members reporting dreams involving the sensation of floating. A low rumbling vibration in the signal corresponded to images of growth or branching structures. It was a Rosetta Stone, but for consciousness itself. She wasn't translating words, she was mapping raw concepts. The signal wasn't a language of nouns and verbs, it was a language of sensation, emotion, and archetypal imagery. The team, now fully on board, helped her build a new kind of dictionary. It was a database of feelings and symbols. They assigned values to the signal's fluctuations based on their shared dream experiences. They were building a bridge, slowly and carefully, out of the most subjective materials imaginable, their own subconscious minds. The work was mentally and emotionally draining. Living a double life, one in the sterile control room and another in the alien dreamscape, took its toll. The team grew withdrawn, quiet, their conversations filled with strange, abstract references that no outsider could understand. They were becoming a culture of five, a tiny island of shared consciousness, adrift in the vast ocean of the signal. Elina knew they were moving closer to understanding, but she also feared they were drifting further and further away from their own humanity. The breakthrough came during a period of deep, focused meditation. Elina, attempting to be more receptive to the signal, had started spending hours in a quiet room simply listening, her mind open. As she drifted in the sea of sound, another dream took hold, more powerful and lucid than any before. This time, it wasn't just a landscape, it was a memory. She felt the powerful rhythmic push and pull of currents against a body that was not her own. She experienced the sensation of seeing not with eyes, but with her entire skin,
perceiving the faint pressure waves and temperature changes in the surrounding liquid. She was in a vast, subterranean ocean on a world lit only by the faint bioluminescence of strange floating flora. Above her, through the thick liquid firmament, she could see the light of a star that was not the sun. She felt a sense of immense community, of being one part of a vast, silent chorus of minds, all connected, all sharing the same space, the same thoughts. And then she felt a wave of profound, ancient sorrow. It was the memory of loss. The memory of their star dying, of their world growing cold, the memory of a desperate exodus, of consciousness itself being flung into the void as a final, desperate act of survival. She awoke with a jolt, the memory of that alien sorrow echoing in her heart. Tears were streaming down her face. She finally understood. The signal wasn't just a thought process. It was a memory, a fossilized consciousness, an SOS message in a bottle repeating its story of loss for millennia across the empty darkness. She stumbled back to the control room, her mind reeling. She knew what she had to do. They couldn't just listen. They had to answer. Working with the engineers, she isolated the simplest, most universal pattern she could find in the signal, the one that corresponded to the feeling of acknowledgement or presence. Using a focused transmitter, they converted the pattern into a simple, clean radio wave and beamed it back towards the signal's source. It was a tiny whisper of a reply, a single sentence in the language of dreams saying only, "We are here. We hear you." The moment their reply was sent, the impossible happened. The main signal stopped. After 212 hours of continuous, complex broadcast, there was only silence. The organic, living waveform on the main screen vanished, replaced by a single flat, unwavering line. The speakers, which had become a constant ambient presence in their lives, now hissed with the empty sound of deep space static. The silence was not peaceful. It was violent. It was a deafening, crushing void that left a ringing in their ears. The team stood frozen, staring at the flat line, their faces a mixture of terror and awe. "What did we do?" Ben whispered, his voice trembling. "Did we break it? Did we frighten it? Or it's acknowledging us," Elina said, though her own confidence was shaken. "It's pausing. It's thinking." The next few hours were the most tense of the entire project. The military liaison, a stern Air Force general named Madsen, who had been observing their progress with growing impatience, saw the silence as a failure, or worse, a prelude to something hostile. He made a series of terse phone calls to the Pentagon. The atmosphere in the control room grew thick with the unspoken threat of the project being terminated. Then, after nearly 8 hours of agonizing silence, a new signal flickered to life. It appeared on the screen as a simple, clean sine wave. It was structured, mathematical. It began with a sequence of prime numbers, 1, 3, 5, 7, 11. Then it moved to the value of pi, transmitted to 32 decimal places. It was the classic textbook first contact signal that SETI had been searching for decades. The entity had received their whisper of acknowledgement, and in return, it was trying to speak in a language it had learned from them. It had looked into their minds, seen their understanding of the universe, and was now trying to build a bridge from its side using the cold, clean bricks of human mathematics. The team erupted in a flurry of relieved, excited activity. They had done it. They had established two-way communication. But Elina felt a new sense of unease. The first signal had been a song, a soul laid bare. This new signal was a telegram. In an attempt to be understood, she feared they had asked this ancient emotional creature to silence its own true voice.
The new signal was easy to decipher. It was a language of pure logic. Over the next day, the entity transmitted a wealth of information. It sent them a map of its home solar system, confirming the details Elina had seen in her dream. It sent them basic biological data, a simplified diagram of its life cycle, confirming it was a non-physical collective consciousness. The team worked with a feverish excitement, finally gathering the hard data Washington wanted. But as the information flowed, Elina felt a growing sense of dread. The emotional, subconscious link from the first signal had not vanished entirely. Woven between the clean data packets of the new signal was a faint, persistent undercurrent of feeling. And that feeling was fear. It was a cold, ancient, and profound terror, a fear of darkness, of silence, of ultimate endings. As she worked, Elina began to experience flashes of the entity's experience more intense than ever before. She felt the cold death of its sun. She felt the panic of a billion minds as their world froze. She witnessed the final desperate gamble, converting their entire collected consciousness into a single directed energy beam, a ghost flung into the void in the hope that someone, somewhere would hear their story. She finally understood the truth. The signal wasn't a distress call from a damaged ship. The signal was the ship, and it was the survivor. It was the last remnant of an entire civilization, a digital soul adrift in the cosmos for eons, slowly degrading, slowly losing its coherence. The complex, beautiful patterns of the first signal were the sound of its memory slowly fraying apart. The contact was not the beginning of a new relationship. They were bearing witness to the final moments of a very old one. They were listening to the last word of a dead civilization, a word that had been traveling towards them since before the dawn of humanity. The weight of this revelation was crushing. The project was no longer about the triumph of discovery, but about the solemn duty of being a witness to the end. The emotional toll on the team became undeniable. Members became quiet, withdrawn, prone to long periods of silent contemplation. Their sleep was filled with shared nightmares of cold and loss. The project's medical officer reported a rise in anxiety and depressive symptoms across the board. General Medicine saw this not as a shared psychological experience, but as a hostile attack. "This entity is broadcasting a mimetic weapon," he argued in a heated meeting with Elina and Dr. Thorne. "It's infecting your team with fear and depression. We don't know its motives. This could be a prelude to an invasion, a way to soften us up psychologically." "General, it's not a weapon, it's grief," Elina countered, her voice shaking with a passion that surprised even herself. "It's the last survivor of a cosmic catastrophe, sharing its memory. It's asking for empathy, not surrender." "Empathy is a luxury we can't afford, Doctor," Madsen retorted, his face like stone. "My duty is to protect this nation from threats, not to hold a seance for a ghost in a machine. The data it's providing is minimal. All we are getting is a psychological contagion." His mind was made up. He had already made his recommendation to the Joint Chiefs. He turned to Elina, his eyes cold. "You have 48 hours, he said, the words falling like axe blows. "Establish clear, non-emotional, technical communication. Get schematics, verifiable scientific data, something of tangible value. If you can't, I have been authorized to terminate this project. We will broadcast a wide-spectrum, high-energy signal directly at the source. We will deafen it permanently. We will put this ghost to rest." The ultimatum hung in the air. 48 hours. 48 hours to prove that a dialogue of grief and memory was more valuable than schematics. 48 hours to save the last whisper of a dead civilization from being extinguished by fear. The clock was ticking. The team tried everything. They sent complex equations, historical texts, musical compositions. The entity replied politely in its sterile language of logic, but it offered nothing new, no great technological secrets. It only continued to broadcast its quiet, underlying sorrow. Elina knew that technology and logic had failed. The general wanted a schematic, but the only thing the entity had left to give was its story.
There was only one way to communicate now. In the final hours, she gathered her small, exhausted team in the center of the control room. She had General Madsen seal the room, giving them privacy. "We can't talk to it through the machine anymore. The machine is a filter. We have to talk to it directly, mind to mind." It was a desperate, insane idea, but they all understood. They had been living in this shared mental space for weeks. It was time to send a message back through the same channel. They sat in a circle, the lights dimmed, the only sound the soft hum of the computers. The signal, the entity's quiet song of sorrow, was piped directly into their headphones. Elina guided them, not as a scientist, but as a meditation teacher. She whispered, "Don't fight the feeling. Accept it. Feel its loss. But then offer it something in return. Not data, not words, a feeling." They sat in silence for a long time, a small circle of humanity adrift in a sea of alien grief. Elina let her own mind sink into the dreamscape, but this time she was not a passive observer. She focused on a single, powerful concept. It was a feeling she drew from her own life, the memory of being comforted by her mother after a childhood nightmare, the feeling of safety, of sanctuary, of another's presence sharing the darkness. She focused all her will, all her empathy, and sent that feeling out into the void, a message of pure compassion with no words to dilute it. A single thought: "You are not alone. We hear your sorrow. Rest now. Be at peace." She felt the other team members join her, their own emotions, of empathy, of respect, of shared mortality, all flowing into the same psychic current. They were sending a lullaby across the stars. The story ends here, in the quiet of that room. It doesn't reveal if the general cut the signal. It doesn't say if the entity replied. It ends with the simple, powerful act of contact being transformed from a search for knowledge into an act of compassion. It leaves the listener in that quiet, meditative state to drift from the silence of the control room into the silence of their own sleep, pondering the final, gentle word sent to a lonely traveler at the end of its long journey.